Alright, so today I'm going to do an update video of a technique that I showed some few years ago, and that video had some outdated techniques and it has some horrible audio, so I'm creating a new one, and this is about frequency separation. So I'm not gonna go over that many details when it comes to the technical stuff because I already explained it before. And to be honest, between the time that I shot that video and today in 2016, frequency separation became pretty mainstream. Like, the reason why I posted that video is because nobody was teaching that. So I'm still gonna show you how to create all the layers and stuff. I'm just not gonna go as detailed. If there's something that you feel that is missing, that I'm skipping, go to someone else's video, go to my video if you can stand the terrible audio, and get familiar with that. But I'm not gonna bore you guys with the same old stuff being repeated over and over again. So this is a frequency separation for the purposes of more of a higher end um, fashion or beauty setting. I am going to post another video on how portrait photographers, like family portraits, boudoir photographers, can take advantage of the frequency separation without spending too much time basically cheating the system. But for this purpose, this should be a more professional way of using it. And this photo that I'm using, I did not photograph this. I don't shoot beauty or fashion a lot, not even for personal projects. So I just went to the Model Mayhem forums and I grabbed this photo from this photographer from Russia named Andrei Mashov. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but shout out to him for providing the image. And I was just thinking about that. If you're just a starting photographer, and you have a lot to learn, obviously, and so if you try, let's be honest, you're probably not gonna be that good, and your retouching is not gonna be that good if you're just starting. So the way I see it is reducing variables as much as possible when you're learning either photographing or retouching. The more you reduce those variables, the better you're gonna get, because if you try bad retouching techniques on a bad photograph, then you're only gonna be frustrated and you're gonna get discouraged, and then you might stop and then decide to do something else with your life. So if you're just starting out, I do recommend you go to some Model Mayhem or some other websites where they provide either free or paid raw files that you can practice on, and so that you practice your retouching aside separately from practicing your photography itself. Anyways, that was just a quick tip. What I think, I don't know, I might be wrong. So let's start with frequency separation. You're gonna see a common theme in anything related to photo or portrait retouching among my videos, or maybe other people's videos, is that we're trying to, again, let's go with the theme of reducing variables. We're trying to fix what's issues or flaws that are color based and issues that are texture based separately. And frequency separation does it in a way different than dodging and burning. It's not about picking one or the other, it's about making those two techniques work together. So frequency separation, we're basically going to separate the image in two, and again, I explained this in much more detail in the earlier video, but we're gonna split the image in two. We're gonna have one layer set up as the basic shape and colors, and the other layer set up with the higher texture and the contrast and stuff like that. Well, let's begin. Let's start by making two copies of the background layer. One will be our low frequency and the other will be our high frequency. Now, the low frequency is we're going to have all the details. No, I don't mean the details. We're going to have the basic shape and the colors. So let's start setting that one up. And I forgot to mention, like I said in the other video, you need to be working on 16-bit mode. I will argue that not only for frequency separation, but for all of your retouching, you really have no reason why you should not be working in 16-bit mode. You're gonna have a better, a wider color gamut when it comes to editing and doing color working and color grading and color correcting, and you're gonna have less issues of banding and things like that. But anyways, let's after we name the layers, let's hide the high frequency layer and let's start working on the low frequency layer. Right now we just need to add a basic blur. Now, the most basic way, the most standard way of doing frequency separation is do it with a Gaussian blur. Some people have experimented with surface blur, with other types of blur, but just for beginners, let's start with Gaussian blur, and then once you get experience enough, you can try experimenting with other types of blurs. Now, the idea here is some people disagree and think differently on how the blur should be applied or the intensity. Some people say have enough blur so that where you just start to not see any kind of like pores or textures in the skin. Some people will say do the blur depending once when you still have some form of texture in the skin. So some will say right after you lose texture, some people say before you lose texture. I tend to be more on the before you lose texture, but I don't make it low enough so that we have the textures in here, because again, the opposite is to separate the textures from the color. And basically what we're doing here is we're deciding what level of texture is gonna be sent to the high frequency layer once we go over that step. And the actual number of the radius will depend on how close the subject is, or how much the subject or the skin is filling the frame. So if you're shooting something that is more fashion oriented, where it's more full frame body, then your radius, your number will be lower. More beauty, the radius, the number will be higher. So right now I'm gonna start at 8, and I'm gonna keep it at 8.5. Okay, now I'm gonna select OK, and I'm gonna move on to the high frequency layer. I'm gonna select this layer, select the high frequency, unhide it so I can show it. Now let's go to image, let's go to apply image. Now the numbers that I'm gonna talk about in here are not going to change. All the other, the blur and all the stuff that varies, this does not vary. So now select as the source is gonna be the image, the layer is gonna be the low frequency layer. We're going to invert it. The blending mode is going to be add, opacity 100, scale to offset 0. I didn't have to change these numbers because those are the ones that I use. If you have never done this technique, you might have to change these numbers. So with me, those were by default. It might not be your case, so make sure. Opacity 100, scale to layer low, channel RGB, invert selected. All right, now let's click OK. Now, as you can see, we can see some of the textures in the edges. Now let's make it so that it shows through the layer. So we're going to change the blending mode from normal to linear light. Okay, now just for the sake of being organized, let's group these layers together by Command or Control J or G. I'm sorry, and then let's name this frequency separation. Okay, now we have a background layer and we have our frequency separation layers. We turn them on and off. You won't see a difference. You're not supposed to see a difference. That's because we haven't done anything to the image other than dividing the photo into the basic shape and the contrast area, the edges and stuff like that. Okay, now we can start working on these things separately and individually. Now, if you see the old video, I was applying a blur, basically a blur to the entire face and destroying all the texture. I don't do that anymore unless there are some extreme cases, but I can't even think of one right now where I will want to maybe fix something with discoloration or something like that for that, on that range. But as of right now, we're just gonna we're basically, now that we've separated, now we're gonna work on fixing all these issues manually, as though we didn't have the frequency separation component added to it. And I am going to, for this purpose, I'm going to duplicate the low layer. And the reason why I'm making a copy of the low layer as opposed to making a blank layer is because sometimes there is some color contamination that I want to get rid of. And I do that with a regular brush tool or with a mixer brush tool. And in those cases, having a duplicate of the layer will work. There are other techniques that we do with hair that's why I will do a copy of the layer. I'm not gonna do that right now because there's not any, like, the hair is not a big component of this photograph. But just to be, for the if or for the maybes, then I make a copy of the low frequency layer again, as opposed of making a new empty layer as you've been probably told to do. Okay, so now that's pretty much that's pretty much all there is to frequency separation, and I just start doing all these fixes manually. Now there are some people, there are some retouchers or photographers that will say that frequency separation is not really a high-end technique, and that is I don't know why they say. It's probably because they see a lot of people doing it the wrong way. But I do think that if done right, if done in the proper way, you can really get pretty good professional results, and easier and faster and better results, just by the fact that we're separating these issues and focusing on the skin texture first, and then on the skin, the colors first, and the basic shape first, and the higher, more defined textures later. And by that I mean you need to work on the low frequency separation first. Some people will work on the high frequency separation first, but as long as you work on these issues separately and you know what you're doing, I think this it could be a high-end tool to use. Not only could be, but it should be a high-end tool to use. And as opposed to in some other videos, I am not going to speed up this process. I am going to keep it live. I'm going to keep trying to make commentary live as I go, just to show you how it really works, how this is really done. I'm going back and forth, and again the problem of showing this high-end technique with some models is that some models have pretty good skin. That's why they are models, and there's really not a lot to show. Probably these techniques you'll start seeing where you need to do a lot more work, probably when you're doing something like makeup related, like those super close-up beauty shots where you only show the lips, or you're only showing what should we say, the eyes or the eyebrows. But for this kind of like almost medium shot beauty photo, it's not that much of a deal. That honestly you'll probably spend a little bit more time doing the dodging and burning, which I just posted a video on that, so you should check it out because a lot of people were asking for it. You're gonna probably spend more on that than actually fixing the skin, because these models tend to have pretty good skin. And again, sometimes it also depends on the lighting, on how good or how hard the lighting is. Okay, so I fixed the basic issues with the skin, where it was more related to like shadowy patches, small shadowy patches, not enough so that I still gonna do those big ones in the dodging and burning, and the small textures that were there. Now we're gonna go and fix the high frequency. So for the high frequency separation layer, you can't just do an empty layer and start retouching, and that it's not either not gonna look good, or it's going to sample also the low frequency layers, and it's going to defeat the purpose. So for the high frequency layer, you need to duplicate the layer if you want to work on a separate layer. If not, you can just work straight onto that high frequency layer, and then clip the high frequency layer in here, the copy, the duplicate, and then change the blending mode back from Lilian light to normal. Okay, and remember your sample should be set to current layer. Whether you're working on the copy or on the original, it must be set to current layer. Okay, and now we can start retouching and editing these little patches right here. So that's basically what I do. I don't do it any differently than if I were not doing the frequency separation technique, in terms of how I clean or heal this these issues. It's just that I do it on these separate layers anyways to have better control and therefore better results. And so it doesn't once you set up the layers, it doesn't make it any slower. I was gonna say it doesn't make it any faster, but since we don't have to worry about messing up the colors right now, for example, now that I'm working on the high frequency separation on the high frequency layer, then I'll argue that it actually makes you work faster. Because I don't have to solve issues that should not be there in the first place. Issues caused by the limitations of the tools or by the limitations of the retoucher's technique. And again, I'm not gonna go super detailed on this, just for the sake of because I'm editing the video, but I will probably spend some time here on her fingers and stuff like that, just to make them look a little bit softer. And just another tip, once we have separated these layers, it's actually easier to work on really thin hairs, because the really thin hairs are almost all of the time going to be moved or placed only on the high frequency separation layer. What that means is that I can just sample a texture that looks kind of like the same, and it's not going to make the colors around it all smudgy. If you're used to using the regular clone healing tool without doing the frequency separation, and you know that there are some areas where it samples the texture and the colors from its surrounding, and the area there are too many things going on its own surroundings that it doesn't make a good blend. Well, now that we don't have to worry about color in this case, that becomes less of an issue, and as you have just saw, it became way faster to just edit out those little those little tiny hairs. So if you're working on or if you're aiming at a professional setting, professional look, think of frequency separation or anything where you're doing this type of work as your prep for making your dodging and burning easier, because your dodging and burning is probably where you're gonna spend most of your time, or what is gonna make the biggest impact. But just like a good paint needs a good primer coat, this is the primer coat for dodging and burning, making these changes, making these small edits to make your life easier. Now let's see if we will want to fix some of these little patches that we can take advantage of the frequency separation layer, of the frequency separation setup. So this is a one way of making your dodging and burning just a little bit easier by adjusting some of the shadow areas, some of the shadow transitions. I made a copy, just a copy of another copy of the low frequency layer, just because these tend to go overboard real quick, and just so that I'm able to reduce the opacity. And again, these will work only on a flat image. So if you had an empty layer with only the retouching strokes, this is where you will have to take a snapshot of that and make it flat, which is not a big deal, but I don't like doing that. So I just start with making duplicates out of the gate. So if you see here, I'm just sampling color very delicately and just going over these areas of transition real softly, real quickly. I don't mean real quickly, I mean with the opposite, taking my time, taking my patience. And this is with the mixer brush tool. This is not a regular brush tool. So the mixer brush tool takes a sample of whatever you click in and then uses that as a color to overimpose the colors that are already on the file, and kind of like it mixes them. So it's kind of like like working with real paint, with real oil. And so be very careful with this. I'm not gonna go over all these settings. Just keep them as low as you can, and that should help you. So this is to one, you can do several things with this technique that I'm doing right now. You can add a little bit of a punch, of a highlight, like right here, and you can fix sometimes some of the color contamination. So if I wanted to I don't know, say, well, I don't see any, but say for example here, where the blue gets interrupted in the middle, you can say, well, I want that to look more even. Then I sample the blue and I am gonna make it even. See, and that gives the illusion of a smoother skin. Or if you say that blue is too intense, I'm gonna grab some of the regular skin tone and just go over all of it, now that I made it even, and just make it a little bit less intense. In here where you say, well, this is like a, I don't know, like this shadow area, I want to make this look more even, go like this. And this is a very delicate process, and it's very, very, very easy to overdo. So do it very delicately. Don't do a lot of it, and it's so that it only helps you. If you do too much of it, then you're gonna make it look fake, and you're gonna make you're probably gonna have more issues with your brush strokes that are bringing in more than you're fixing, and it's just counterproductive. So I just do this a little bit. I do this a lot if I want to fix like more like oily parts, or like this area right here in the fingers, where it's more closer to the bone, so there's more, let's call them hills and valleys of the skin. So just to like soften it up, again, I keep sampling to not alter the colors as much. If you don't want to alter the colors as much, just sample more. And once I turn on the high frequency layer, you will see either if you went overboard, or you will see how much it helped you. And because there is not a lot of texture in the nails, this is a good way of fixing some of these nails. Okay, let's see what I've done. Yeah, so you see, it's just to make it softer just a tiny bit, and I might reduce the opacity because I haven't seen how it's affecting the high frequency layer, because even though they're separate, these layers is still, they still work together. There's still some a link between them that makes that just makes it make sense to our eyes, and by smoothing this out, we are smoothing out the link between these two layers, between this the high frequency and the low frequency. And if you do it too much, then it starts looking fake. Anyways, let's bring back the high frequency layer, and so you see, it's just a tiny bit of making the skin a little bit smoother, so just to make it easier on our frequency separation, on our dodging and burning. And I saw in here that I'm not liking this blue that I was introduced. And see, and this is the problem with this, that the more you do it, the more you fixing this mistake that I'm going to fix, the more you introduce this fake softness that was not there at the beginning. So that's another problem, that you can't keep fixing because you're literally making it worse by trying to keep fixing it. So I'm gonna bring a sample from the original, bring some of that back. Okay, now I'm going to reduce this opacity by like a lot. 45%. Okay, and this is the basic frequency separation technique. Now that you know the basics, you can go and explore all the different ways that frequency separation can work for you. Again, this is not the end of the image. I would probably do some, dodging and burning, on some color correcting, color grading, and all that stuff. But this gave us a pretty basic outline for for our dodging and burning to be quicker, easier, and better on top of the frequency separation. So I don't pick one over the other. I make these two techniques work together, basically.